Welcome to The Explainer. Today we are opening up the ancient legal codes of Numbers chapter 30 to really understand the true heavy weight of a promise. We're going to explore how words were actually considered binding legal contracts in the ancient world, and then trace that all the way to how it shapes our spiritual practices today. So let me ask you, have you ever made a promise to God that you just couldn't keep? Now, that is a heavy question. It's something many of us have likely done. Maybe in a moment of panic or high emotion. We've all been there. But as we look at how ancient Israel handled commitments, we're going to see just how seriously these words were taken. Back then, a promise wasn't just some casual intention, it was a severe, inescapable reality. Today, we'll trace this journey in 4 steps: the anatomy of a vow, unconditional vows, conditional vows, and finally, the paradigm shift. All right, let's jump right into section 1, the anatomy of a vow. To really grasp this, we have to understand what a vow actually was in the Old Testament context. These definitely weren't your casual, "I promise to do better" statements. They were absolute, irrevocable, self-imposed obligations. Usually, you made them to secure God's mercy, or maybe when you desperately needed His intervention. You were putting your absolute word on the line to secure a vital outcome. Listen to how strict this was. The text says, "He shall not break his word. He shall do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth." That is intense, right? Once spoken, you were legally and spiritually locked in. No takebacks, no changing the terms, and you certainly couldn't just say, "Oops, I changed my mind." Your spoken word was the ultimate contract. Moving on to section 2, unconditional vows. Ancient law categorically grouped 3 very specific demographics together: men, widows, and divorced women. It granted them total spiritual autonomy and therefore absolute responsibility. So if you fell into one of these 3 groups, the absolute second a vow left your lips, it was immediately and totally binding. Why? Because these individuals were not under the direct household authority of a father or a husband. They were considered completely independent actors, which meant their vows were entirely unconditional. There were absolutely no legal loopholes here. They had to fulfill their promises faithfully, bearing the entire weight of their words all on their own. Which brings us to section 3, conditional vows. Under the patriarchal system of the time, the men of the household actually held a legal override. So for an unmarried daughter in her youth, her father held the veto authority. For a wife, it was her husband. They could literally step in and completely nullify the vows made by the women living under their roof. Now you might be wondering, why on earth have this veto system at all? Well, it wasn't actually just about control. It served as a really vital societal safety net. According to the ancient texts, this provision protected the whole family unit from the potentially devastating financial or social consequences of, say, a careless or highly emotional promise. And it also functioned to preserve the authority structures within that ancient family unit. But, and this is a big but, this veto power had an incredibly strict expiration date. The clock started ticking the absolute second the father or husband heard the vow. To nullify it, he had to act immediately. That veto window closed firmly on that exact same day. This created a really high-stakes legal precedent. If a husband heard a vow and just stayed silent that day, his silence legally confirmed the promise. It became permanently binding. If he vetoed it immediately, well, she was off the hook. But here is the real kicker. If he stayed quiet initially, but then tried to cancel it days later, he absorbed her guilt. He literally took on the spiritual and legal penalty of her broken promise. How wild is that? Let's head into our final part, section 4, the paradigm shift. Up to this point, we've seen how the ancient tradition demanded absolute, transactional perfection when it came to our words. You make the deal, you pay the price. It was this rigorous system of self-imposed legal bindings that honestly left very little room for human error. But then, Jesus, alongside some incredible teachings in the book of James, radically shifts the focus away from all these complex, self-imposed oaths. Just listen to this quote from Matthew. "Simply let your yes be yes and your no, no." This completely changes the game. It strips away all the complex legal maneuvering of unconditional and conditional vows. This new teaching outlined a completely different, grace-based approach. Instead of trying to force God's hand or, prove our worth through rigid oaths born out of human enthusiasm, believers were encouraged to just speak faithfully. Avoid unnecessary oaths altogether. It meant approaching God completely on the basis of His grace and love,
rather than trying to earn his favor through some sort of self-imposed promise.
We're looking at a massive evolution of the vow here. We go from a strict, patriarchal legal code designed to manage human failure with absolute precision, all the way over to a faith where simple honesty is enough. It's a fundamental shift from a transactional relationship with the divine straight to a relational one that is built entirely on love.
I want to leave you with a thought to really reflect on, because understanding the history of our spiritual practices completely changes how we live them out today. Are your commitments to God driven by a desire to somehow earn His favor, or are they simply a reflection of your faith? Are you trying to negotiate a binding contract, or are you just resting in grace? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this deep dive into the ancient history of vows has sparked some incredible curiosity for you.